It's hard to get a grasp on the students. So I tried to simplify it as much as possible. I said, ladies and gentlemen, now we're not doing domain right now. We are going to be doing domain later in your reviews. But right now, all they're asking of this question is just tell us the variables that are not, or tell us the values that are not defined. So when I was teaching at the beginning of the year, I tried to make it simple. I said, guys, there's really only going to be two times where our values are going to be undefined. When we have a rational expression and we have a value in the denominator, we know that x cannot equal 0, or our denominator cannot equal 0, right? Whatever's in the denominator cannot equal 0. The other constraint that we had is if we have a radical, our radicand, whatever is under our radical, has to be greater than or equal to 0. It cannot be negative. And those are the only two constraints. And I said, basically, all year, that's all we're really going to focus on. However, we did start talking about different constraints this year, talking about like cosine inverse, sine inverse, tan inverse. We talked about that a little bit more. Once we talk about logarithms, we'll talk about more of that. But basically, here's our main two constraints we've talked about all year. So if you guys look at this, the example that I chose has both of these constraints, right? We have values in the denominator. Whatever values make this denominator equal to 0 are not defined for this equation or function. So what you simply do is take your denominator and set it equal to 0. That's it. So add 4, x squared is equal to 4, square root, x equals plus or minus 2. So therefore, x cannot equal 2, and x cannot equal negative 2. Right? So the values that the value that this function is undefined for is plus or minus 2. Or we could also say x cannot equal 2, x cannot equal negative 2. And does that make sense? If you plug in 2 here, 2 squared is 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. 0 cannot be in the denominator. Make sense? Anytime you have a radical, we have to set it to be greater than or equal to 0. So all I'm going to do is take my radicand, and I just set it equal to 0. OK? Then what we basically go ahead and do is just solve for x. So we know that x has to be greater than or equal to negative 5. OK? Or we could say x cannot be less than negative 5. Right? We could also say x cannot be negative 5. Cannot be less than negative 5, if you're looking at it that way. Does that make sense? OK, now, usually I think I got most people on that side. Where I lost you was writing it in